What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and today we're going to be going over buffered input in the fighting game tutorial series. So this is one I'm pretty happy with. Buffered input, if you're not aware, is essentially being able to perform actions before the character is actually ready to perform them. So potentially, say you're in some sort of state, like if I'm already in an attack and I perform the attack again, like this. Or if I am doing the fireball, I should be able to buffer an attack. You heard me press the key beforehand and perform it after. Now, there should be a limit to when we can press this, right? You shouldn't be able to press it like, if I press this and then instantly do light attack, I shouldn't really have my light attack buffered. But to fix that issue, that will be in buffered input part 2, where we go over converting these things to frames and being able to clear out the input buffer based on those frame amounts. So that will not be in today, just so you're aware. So you will be able to press the button pretty much at any time after you perform the action and buffer the next move. However, we will be able to do all sorts of stuff. Say we get hit, we get put into hit stun, I can buffer an attack and perform that action while I'm out of hit stun. So basically the first frame I'm available to perform it, the character performs the attack. Now I will say also, if my attacks were faster, then you wouldn't really notice this issue nearly as much about being able to buffer so early. The problem is my attacks were quite long. Instead of being 4, 8, 12 frames, we were sitting here on these like literally 100 of frame attacks. And that's why we need to do some work with changing these to be specific frame values so we can check our buffer a little bit easier and check it to a specific frame. So don't worry about that stuff yet. It's not really a flaw with anything we've done. We just need to make sure our animations actually support that. But I'm going to go into a lot of depth on this one today because I really do want you guys to fully understand the system and what I intend to do. This is a more complex episode, not necessarily in terms of logic or what we do in the code, but I think it's very important to know how this is being handled and what exactly we expect to get out of it, because it's insanely important that we know that. That way our input buffer and our input system works exactly how we would expect. So just to recap, I can press an attack and buffer a next input. I can press it early and he will still perform the action afterward. I don't have to wait for the animation to end. If these animations were quicker and a small number of frames, you probably wouldn't notice it. However, right now we can basically perform the action at any time, like that. And you can see that we can perform, the buffered attack can be performed very early on in the animation and still occur after, which we may not want. You can see I can keep buffering fireballs. It will only buffer one move in advance, which is intended at this point, so it's not a huge deal, but with the long animations, it can definitely be an issue, because if you're fighting, when your attacks are as long as mine are, it can be very annoying to buffer an attack and then have to wait for that attack to finish if, new information has come across. So anyway, that's basically what we're going to be doing today. Buffering that information and displaying it when we want to. And what we need to do to perform that is we need to change our code around, and we're going to get into this all in a few minutes, but what we're basically going to need to do is perform actions on tick as opposed to when we press the inputs. And it seems a little weird that we would do that, but what's really happening here is we have inputs that the user is putting into the game. They're pressing keys, they're pressing buttons, and those are read, and they need to determine what move they correspond to when the buttons are pressed. However, we may not want to perform an action until a certain frame, if we add some input delay, or we may want to configure what attacks, what moves, what special abilities or items that we want to use like in relation to other ones. So for example, we can give moves a priority by either their complexity, by assigning an actual priority to the move, and we may want to determine what action should be taken if multiple commands are pressed at the same time. So for example, fireball for me is back, forward, and then light attack. But light attack is also a command that I have on my character. So when I press the light attack, both of those commands are going to be valid. We have to determine what command we actually want to use. Alright, so let's get into it for real this time. Now, before we actually get into all the logic, If you have not watched any episode of the series, this is episode 76, I believe, so we are very far along, and this is a pretty complex episode that's going to be building off of our already pretty complex input system. So if you would like to catch up, I'll leave the links right here in the top right corner to the first episode of the input system and to the entire playlist if you want to catch up. Otherwise, let's go into the important blueprints, and we'll start there because there's a few changes we need to make that are vital to our success here. So first things first, we need to go into base character BP, or all your characters that have the input stuff. So I've commented these out now, or not commented them out, I've just commented them so that you can see what is going on here. So before we had this stuff where we were adding inputs to the input buffer for P1 and P2, remember, if you're on controller, they're both going to go through this P1 thing, and that's intended. P2 is specifically for keyboard, which is the reason I set it up this way. So regardless, all inputs, keyboard or controller, are going to be going through one of these two nodes. And what we were doing was getting the key that they had pressed, and we basically made sure that it was a key that was in the input type map here. And if it was found, then it was going to be added to the input buffer. And we did the same thing for this one, but we made sure that player 2 was valid. Okay? And just for the record, if you're directly following this tutorial series, this was not a validated get last time because I had done some stuff prior to make sure that player 2 reference was valid. So if you're changing it to make it look like mine now, where I've removed, you can see I've removed the remove old input from buffer. The start of each of these input actions, I had this remove old input from buffer function being called here. If you compare yours to mine, you'll see that it should have extra nodes right here at the very start. And it was this function where we were removing inputs after 0.2 seconds have passed. I've removed that from the button press now. Now more than ever, it's important that we do this on tick, or we do this on some sort of update where we know, how quickly it should be removed once the frames are gone. Now remember, we don't have the frame amounts in yet. That's not until next episode. But we do need to change this so that objects are not being removed on button press, but the inputs are being removed on tick, or on some sort of update. I'm going to keep saying some sort of update, but really, it's just tick in this case. If you happen to have another update function, which you can, it's very possible, feel free to do it there. We're going to be just using the standard tick. Alright, so you can see I've removed it from both player 1 and player 2 for add to input buffer. So this is why I'm pointing out, make sure that your player 2 reference is a validated get, or you check if it's valid before adding to input buffer, because if you press buttons and this does not happen to be valid, you will crash or at least get errors. I was doing the validated get before when I was removing old inputs from buffer, but that's no longer there. I just want to point that out. I don't want any confusion. So this is how it looks now. And now event tick, which we did not have before in the base character BP, we are going to add. The way you add this is you just type event tick, just like this. It will pop this node up here if you don't already have it. And then I'm just calling remove old inputs from input buffer. Now, remember, if you're on controller, this is going to be called for 2 separate characters, and it's going to be completely normal. This, we shouldn't really be clearing it for both player 1 and player 2 reference here normally, but since we're worrying about the keyboard case, I've done this. This will most likely get updated when we are doing the next episode where we actually have the frame amounts, and we don't want to just do it on tick because we can actually grab the data from both player 1 and player 2 to perform this action. For now, this is perfectly fine and will work without issue, but I did want to let you know that you don't have to clear them both, and you probably shouldn't really be clearing them both for each character, right? It seems a little silly to clear them both for each character in this case. But since we're worrying about the keyboard and not worrying about the actual update frame where we should remove them, then this is perfectly fine. As for this function itself, I haven't changed anything. So if you follow this series, you will know that this is how this function looks, and there's nothing you have to change in it. Alright. And essentially what all that stuff was, remember I'm going into a lot of depth here because I want to make this as clear as I can, but what all of this evaluates to basically is I've removed the function calls to remove the old inputs from buffer after a button was pressed if they are more than 0.2 seconds old. And the reason for this is if we're doing buffered input, we need to be able to perform an action prior to the end of another move and have it pick up on the command. If we have the old inputs in there, then that could be an issue. We have the old inputs in the input buffer still. We could read the commands incorrectly. We could read extra commands. Instead, we just want to clear them out once they're too old, regardless of if the player has acted or not. And that's the first step to doing this, is we do it on tick. One other note I should say about this, and it is important, since we are using the base character BP, which is the a child of the fighter template character, which is our code class, the blueprint is the actor that is spawned, and since it is the child of the code class, it will run first. So if you add other things to event tick, it is going to run before our code's event tick. Very important to note. It's not really going to matter here, but as you're adding things to it, make sure you know that order of operations. The blueprint tick runs before the code tick. Alright, now let's get into some of the code today, because we're going to adjust both some of the orders and also the way that we handle what move is getting used. So I'll start with a familiar function here. I have moved my functions around a little bit, so don't worry if you don't see other functions that we had. If you happen to be trying to compare the code directly, just know that I have moved them around a little bit so that I could show them without skipping around the code a lot. So here is the check input buffer for command using type. This is where we were going through, checking our input types that were added to our input buffer and comparing them to commands. This is going to stay almost exactly the same, but the difference is when we call this, we don't want to perform the action right away. Instead, we're going to want to add this to the moves that we could potentially use. That way we can use them on the frame that we want, or after a mandatory input delay, or something like that. And that's how buffered input works. In this case, we are actually just going to be doing it every tick, because again, we don't have the frame requirements here. We're just using seconds. So I'm just going to be doing it every tick, which is every frame. However, in the next episode, when we cover the update to use frames instead of time, then we'll be able to specify what frame we want to perform this on, or, you know, a mandatory input lag. That way we know when to perform a command in relation to what tick we're on, what frame we're on. Okay, so let's follow the whole process even though we've already done this. So we have add input to input buffer, which gets called from the blueprint function that we were just looking at. Okay, so when a correct action is taken, then we call add input to input buffer and add the proper input. We then call check input buffer for command using type. So we don't want to do this on tick because we still want to only check and loop through all the commands when a button was pressed. If no command has been pressed, then we probably don't need to update the move buffer, which is basically our array of commands that we can use. So nothing's changed there. We call check input buffer for command using type. We go through and we find a match for our input buffer. That's right here. This is saying, yes, we have found a match. The player has used this command. Before, we were calling start command here. We don't want to call start command here anymore. If we call start command here, what we're actually doing is starting the command. We're saying, yes, the character can perform this animation, can perform this attack. For example, they can use Fireball. We don't actually want to use Fireball here. We don't want to use it now. That's the important part. Input buffering is about preparing the moves that we can use for the future. It doesn't mean performing it right on the spot. It's not canceling the moves that we're already in to perform that action, and it's not waiting for the other animation to complete, returning to idle, performing the command again. We want to add commands that the player has pressed, they have entered correctly. That way we can perform them at a later date. So we need this thing that I'm calling move buffer. So let's take a look at that. Go into our fighter template character.h. I'll scroll down to where I have other T arrays. So we have this array called character commands. We have one called input buffer. I'm making one called move buffer, and the comment here is accurate. So commands that have had their inputs pressed correctly and can be activated on the next update tick or when other animation states have completed. So yes, this is accurate right now. However, it's not always going to be the next update, remember. could be an update of our choosing, or a certain amount of frames of our choosing. For now, it's the next update. So this is going to hold all the commands that the character has pressed that can now be used during that update. Again, for example, if I press back right or back forward light attack, I'm both going to add the light attack and the fireball to the move buffer because both of those commands have been met. Okay? So once you've made your move buffer, we want to add the command that was found, that our player matched the inputs for. We don't want to start the command here. So change start command to just adding it to the move buffer. Then all this stuff is the same. We can go down, and I'm going to make a new function here. I'm going to make a function called determine command to use. Here we go. So I put it directly under check input buffer for command using type, just so you could understand where it was, but you can put it wherever you want. Just as long as it's in your header file, go ahead and make this. And again, the comment here is important. So determine which commands should be used based off of specific criteria, such as move length, difficulty, or relevance. And what this means is we're going to determine what move from the move buffer we actually want to perform. So if you have multiple moves that could be performed, which one's more important? Should they be both be performed? Should they be performed in a certain order? And that's all going to depend on the logic that we want to set up. So make this function. It doesn't have to be blueprint callable. I'm not calling it from blueprint, but I like to have the option. I can always remove it later toward the end of the game or when I'm satisfied with the system and I know I don't need it. Go back into the CPP, write this function, and then let's go over the logic inside of it. So determine command to use is determining what move from the move buffer is actually important to us. Which one do we want to use on the character at the given moment, at the given frame? The way I'm figuring this out is I'm going strictly off of the complexity, which is going off of the number of inputs. There are a few potential issues with this. So, for example, if there's two inputs that happen to have the same amount of actions right now, but there's something we don't account for, say charge time or something like that, then right now those are not going to work within our system because it's not going to pick the correct move. So let me show you how this works, and then we can talk about ways we can change it and ways we're going to have to change it when we do charge attacks, when we do multi-button attacks. And that's perfectly okay. I've planned for all of these, but I just want to let you know, if you've implemented those things before this episode, they will not work without the adjustments that you'll find in those episodes. Alright, so if moveBuffer.num is greater than 0, what I'm doing here is I'm checking to make sure that there are moves that our character can actually use right now. .num isn't an index thing, it returns the actual number of elements. So if it's less than or equal to 0, there's no moves that the character can actually move from the move buffer right now, which means we should skip using a move this frame. Otherwise, if it's greater than 0, we have at least one move that we can use. Now we have to go through and sort the move and determine which move to use. So I'm making an F command here called move to use. And we should probably use pointers and things like that, but that's for other episodes when we go over cleaning things up. So essentially what we're doing is we're making a move that we're going to call start command with. Okay? And we're assigning it to the first index in move buffer 0. If moveBuffer.num is greater than 0, move buffer 0 definitely should have an element in it, so you shouldn't worry about this being invalid. However, feel free to do moveBuffer.isValidIndex with index 0, and then go ahead and set this to moveBuffer index 0 to be safe. However, I'm just going for this route for now. If I find issues with it or potential downsides, then I will go ahead and change that. But I'm setting it to the first index in move buffer, so I'm setting it to the first move we find. And I'll go ahead and debug this with you so you can see what it looks like. But say that it finds fireball and light attack. I'm looping through the move buffer. Notice what I do here. I start at index 1, since we set move to use at index 0, so the loop can start at index 1. I basically want to compare the first move in the move buffer to every other move that's in the move buffer, and what I'm doing to determine what move should be used is I'm using the most complex move. Basically the move that takes the most inputs. So think about this. If we have a move with 1 input, such as light attack, and a move with 3 inputs, such as fireball. These moves are only in this move buffer if we've matched the inputs. Well, if I've matched 3 consecutive inputs for fireball, that's probably what I was trying to perform. There's no real reason to perform light attack here. Light attack only takes 1 move to perform. 1 input to perform. So if I've matched 3 in a row, it's more than likely that I was trying to perform fireball, or I was just mashing buttons and I happened to do that, in which case I should still perform fireball. So I'm going strictly off complexity. There are cases where you may not want to do that, and we can handle those at a later date. But for now, I think this is more than good enough. Basically, I start my for loop at 1, I make sure that it's less than the end of the array, that way we don't crash, and I increment I. Now we're going to compare the amount of inputs that each one has, and we're going to set the move to use based on that. So, if move to use, remember this is an F command, so this has everything that our command structure has, which F command is right here. So we have the array of input types. So for fireball, it's backward, forward, light attack. Okay, so the num of that would be 3. Then we compare it to the other one. Say it's light attack. Move buffer I, so say move buffer 1 is light attack. The input types for that are light attack, so there's 1. Thus, move to use is less than, is it less than light attack? Is fireball less than light attack? No. Fireball takes more inputs to perform than light attack does. Thus, we don't want to change the move to use. However, if the roles were reversed, say move to use is light attack, we compare it to the move buffer I, so say that's fireball. 1 is less than 3. That is absolutely accurate. Thus, move to use should be updated to this new move as it's more complex. So move to use equals move buffer I. That's all we're doing. This will go through the entire loop, find the most complex action or command that was performed successfully, and set that to be the move we should use. So then I call start command move to use and give it the name, because start command uses the command name to perform the action. I then empty the move buffer. You see I have a commented out input buffer here, and the reason I've commented this out is we don't really want to do this. However, you can feel free to clear out the input buffer after an action was used. It won't really hurt you here. I'm going to actually show you the reason you don't want to do it in the next episode and why it's important we do things the way we do. So I've left this commented out kind of as a note. You don't have to add this comment. It's more going to be used for a demo. So don't get confused by the input buffer.empty. It's something that I want to use as basically a little tutorial for why things are working the way they are. Move buffer.empty, however, you probably do want to do because that empties the moves. So once we've performed an action, we want to empty it. We don't want to go through and keep adding to this move buffer. It'll get bigger and bigger. Once we've used it, we can say, nope, we don't have any more moves we want to use. If for whatever reason you do want to use more than one move out of your move buffer at a time, so say you buffered a move and for whatever reason you want to keep the moves, maybe there you have some sort of infinite attack or something like that, then you could keep, you don't have to empty the buffer, you could keep using it for a certain amount of times. But that's a very specific case and a case that I'm not really familiar with in fighting games. However, I have seen it done in other games for other reasons. So if you do have that for any reason, feel free to adjust that as needed. Okay, and in start command is the same thing. It's still taking the command name, comparing against our commands, finding the move, making sure we can act on it, and then setting the command to be true. And then in tick, we're calling determine command to use. So remember, and this is the last time I'll say it, but this is being called every tick right now. Later, it's probably going to be delayed. That way we have that mandatory or that intentional input lag or input delay. That way we can actually get the buffered input effect. Right now it's happening every update, which is actually fine, but it kind of messes up with some of the things that are usually expected out of a buffered input system. We would want to, determine the actual frame we want to use it on, not just do it every single update. For now, this is okay. And that's everything we need to do in the code. We do have quite a few changes we have to make within the anim BP because I want to switch some of the inputs around, and I want to show you guys how you can completely use our input system instead of using the was light attack used and those sort of things. Alright, so before we get into the animation blueprint, let's click on our class defaults and let me show you what I have here. Actually, this is the base character BP. We want to go to our specific characters that we have that are children of the base character BP because they have our move lists, our character commands. You can see in the Mutant BP, I've kind of covered this in the past, but I have all my commands that are specific to this character. So, for example, I have Fireball that has backward, forward, light attack, which I've been saying this whole time. But I have a bunch of other commands as well. And all these commands actually do work on this character. But I've also added 4 commands at the start here for my basic attacks. And you can even go as far as to add commands for walking and different things like that. For now, I haven't done that. But you can see that I've made a light attack command which only takes the light attack input, which is basically it overrides the boolean that we have that we set in code, that when we press the button for the light attack, we add an input action called attack 1p1, and then in that function that we call, which would be start attack 1, then we were setting was light attack used to true. I mean, that system is still valid, but now our input system is very good, and also we're going to be using it to use buffered inputs, so we don't really want to use these booleans anymore. You can keep them for now until you're comfortable with the new system and see that it's working. Heck, I've even kept them in here just to make sure everything is good, and we don't need them anymore before I remove them. But you can see that we want to start switching the system over to have all of our inputs within the character commands. So to do this, I've added a command, like I've said, light attack, medium attack, heavy attack, special attack, and all they have is the actual input, which we already have set up in previous episodes. They're basically bound to our buttons based off the name of the input, which we assigned in the character blueprint. So make sure you have these character commands in here, and make sure you know the indices, the index of each one. You know, some people might think this is hard coding. In my opinion, it actually really isn't. Unless you want to change your moves around at runtime for any reason, then there's no real reason I can think of to not do it this way. I don't see any drawbacks to having specific indices that are tied to these, because if you know the index, it shouldn't be an issue to actually go through and, you know, say, oh, character command 0 is light attack. We can just look and figure it out. This is how our command list is structured as well, so I don't really see any reason to not do this. So again, I already had this set up, but I'm just pointing this out again. You really are going to want these now because we're going to switch over the system to use them in the future. Let's go to our animation blueprint. And we're going to go for our mutant here, as we usually do. And let's go to the event graph. We are going to want to use the state machine as well, but I want to show you a few updates I've done. These aren't entirely necessary, all of them. So, you know, you can pick and choose what you want to do. If I would do it all personally for now, just to make sure everything's working the same as it is in mine. And then I'll kind of go over why I made each choice so you can decide what you want to use and what you don't want to use. So first of all, I've organized the NMVP a little bit. I did not add comments like I wanted to just yet, so I'll try to get around to commenting everything next episode. But I've taken the transition roles, the transition rules that we have, because I've had one for start attack, end attack, start jump. Well, technically I did have one for start jump. I think I either removed it or did not bring it over here. But I have start throw, and end jump. And I had these kind of all doing the same thing, but they were split up. Heck, even now I have one that's start potential X attack transition, which is split up. This doesn't really need to be split up, and you'll see with our new input system that this is actually going to be a breeze to perform X attacks. So really we'll be removing this, but just so everything is still functional at the current time, this is how I have it set up now. I've cleaned this up a lot, so these aren't all different nodes. Basically, all the end transitions, end attack, end jump, end throw, do the same thing. They set can move back to the default, because at this point, you're ending this action, so you're going back to idle, thus you can move. And then I go and reset variables, and I clear hitboxes. Well, I had the end command transition right here. Basically, once we were done a command, I was resetting all the commands back to false. This is still being done. And then I was actually dragging off of completed here and bringing it to the end attack transition. Bringing it to this path right here. I don't want to do this anymore. The reason I was doing that is because we were going strictly off of the state system. So we were performing an attack, and once the attack was done, we wanted to reset the values to default. Now, that was right with how we had it set up before. We wanted to reset the values once the action was done. However, think about this now. We want to perform actions, and we want to be able to perform actions while we're performing other actions. So we don't want to reset these anymore when we are done. I do, however, want to reset them once we've started. This is because I don't want to mash like 30,000 attacks within a few frames, which, I mean, I know it's not physically possible, but just bear with me on this one. Say I press literally 300 attacks somehow, at one time. Well, we want to reset our commands from being used. That way the buffer, our move buffer, can actually currently pick from the ones that have been pressed in the middle of the move or in the middle of the hit stun or something like that. We don't want to just be able to press all these attacks and continue afterward. So I do want to do the end command transition when these transition events fire off. Now, these have all been covered. Well, not really. The throw has been covered in the throw, but the start attack and end attack transition have been covered since like episode 2 or 3 or 4 of the tutorial series. So this is something we use all the time. For those that aren't familiar, if you happen to be just checking this episode out, these are transition rules. Well, that's a bad example because that was my X attack. These transition rules are the start transition event and the let me give you... Sorry, I'm trying to give you a good example so it doesn't get more confusing. Here we go. So, start attack transition, end attack transition are the start transition events to each node from idle. So from idle to light attack is start attack transition. In this case, it happens to be start potential X attack transition just because of some stuff I had to do before this input change to make X attacks work, since I was going to make them work off of 2 inputs at once, which is now unnecessary. But the attack, the state back to idle, so like light attack back to idle, is end attack transition. So these 2 transitions were basically just to say, yes, we were going from idle to this state, or we were going from the state back to idle. And we were using them a lot because we wanted to determine if the character could move, we wanted to determine what we had to do with hitboxes and different things like that. I've made it much simpler, I've cleaned it up, so you can just follow this exactly. Don't get confused, these are the same transition events I've had in the series, I've just cleaned them up. And I'm calling end command transition on the start attack, start throw, as opposed to the ends, because of the way our new system works. I will probably change this name. In fact, we can change it right now, because end command transition is not the right name for this anymore. But I did not want to change it prior and confuse anybody. So if I want to change this name, I will actually have to change them in here. Sorry. So in like fireball back to idle. I'm using end attack transition here. I'm not using end command transition anymore. And then what I'm doing is I'm calling that notify here. Okay. So again, I can't rename this without renaming the states in the state machine here. So for example, command 1 back to idle. I would have to change this. And what I'm going to call this is reset command values, I think is a good one. Basically to reset the command values back to default. The problem with doing this is that I need to actually call this everywhere. I need to use this reset command values everywhere. Okay. And so let me show you exactly what we're doing here. I'm not going to waste your time with it now. I don't want to bloat this episode, but I do want to make this clear because I am going to make this change. End command transitions is just no longer the right name. It will make it very confusing. So instead what I'm doing is I'm going to switch out end command transition for reset command values. Unfortunately, I can't just rename it since these commands are generated from the state machine, from the transitions I put in here. That's the only reason you see this here. So I'm going to transfer this, and I'm going to change end command transition to be reset command values. Actually, I have the function here. For now, since I have them, since I have them both here and I've not updated every state, I'm going to call them both. I don't want you to be confused. You can keep using end command transition if it helps, but from a tutorial standpoint and explaining it to you guys, I think it's confusing to call it end command transition. So I'm going to call it reset command values from here on out. For now, I'm calling them both just so I don't have to edit this all live. All right. So if you're confused about that at all, feel free to message me. I will, or comment. I will explain that. I'm not trying to make your life harder. I just feel like this is the right move. End command transition just flat out does not make sense anymore for where we're using it. Okay. So anyway, I wanted to cover these changes that I made because they make it a lot cleaner, and I wanted to change that name because it's been bugging me and I think it's the wrong name. The other minor change I made that you're going to want to adjust if you want your X attacks to keep working for now before we change them over to using the buffered input system, which will happen when we change to frames next episode, is you're going to want to also call your new function here, and in this case, again, I'm calling end command transition, but you're going to want to call reset command values here. The only reason these transitions are even different is because for the X attacks, I did not want to reset the button presses. It's a flaw of the way that the X attack system was set up, but it was the best way I could come up with before we had our buffered input system. Regardless, just try and set it up like this. I think it'll all make sense as we finish this episode. Alright, so those are the adjustments we made to the AnimBP. Now, let's look at the actual things, the actual way this is working. So in default, in our state machine, let's go to our states that we want to perform that are basic attacks. So for example, idle to light attack. I've left the old stuff in here so you could compare, but now I've set up all of these commands and all of our states to work off of the character commands array as opposed to the booleans we had in the past. So for example, instead of using was light attack used, I'm now using character reference character command 0 has used command. Character command 0 is our light attack. Has used command is set in start command. So we call determine command to use in tick. It goes through our move buffer, which if we press light attack will be in the move buffer as long as it doesn't get canceled out by a more important move or higher priority move such as fireball. Then the move to use.name will be light attack, and we will call start command, which will set has used command to true. And thus in the AnimBP in this rule here, it will check 0 has used command, and since that will be true, then we will use our light attack. You will want to do that for every attack where we were using our was attack used. So your directional attacks, your idle to medium attack, you can see this is how it was. I was setting it to not moving and was medium attack used. Now we don't use was medium attack used. Instead, we just use character command get 1, so index 1, which is medium attack. So you can switch out these booleans everywhere you see them. If you still want to use them, I mean, feel free. But you'll have to do extra logic to make sure that they are not firing, which is a little bit... It's more work than it's necessary, and it's definitely prone to more bugs because you have two variables for the same thing that you're looking for. You're looking for it here and here. So it just added confusion. So I would just get rid of these booleans now. Just disconnect them if you're not totally sure you want to remove them entirely. And do it for your crouch attacks as well, jumping attacks as well. There's a lot. I don't have to go through all of them, I don't think. Just to show you an example, like I didn't even actually do it here for the record. I actually forgot to do it in the jump attacks. But we don't want to do this anymore, right? We want to use our... I'll show you doing it live. That way, hopefully it makes more sense. So I disconnected was light attack used for my jump light, and I'm instead putting in Instead, we want to check for this command as opposed to this Boolean. So again, I'll leave that there for you to look at, but really we just care about this from now on. So anywhere where you use these, go ahead and flip them to the character commands as opposed to the Booleans. In the commands themselves, like I had these actions for commands, these are special attacks, essentially a sequence of attacks. Like I keep referencing Fireball just because it's a good one to test with, because I think everyone's kind of familiar with the Fireball in a fighting game. So Fireball is command 6 on my mutant BP. Index 6, Fireball, backward, forward, light attack. So you can see that all the moves are now set up the same way, whether they're basic, whether they're special moves, super moves, whatever. We just basically check the command list to see if that command has been activated. Alright, so pretty simple there. And the other thing we have to do is if we want to be able to perform the same command from the state we're in. This is a big one because I know a lot of the times it comes up with hit stun. Like, how are we going to perform hit stun? We're already in the hit stun state, so how are we going to go back to the hit stun state? Do we need another state? And that is going to be for another episode, because there's actually quite a few changes we have to do to make that work. But the reason I'm covering that is this is actually the same process here. If you click on the state itself, the state that you want to be able to replay from itself. So for example, light attack. I can go into my game, and we already did this, but I want to show you because I think it'll make more sense if you see it. We can go into the game, and I can perform light attack. If I press it once, it only does it once. If I press it once, press it again, it does it each time. If I press it and then I buffer it, then it does it again. The little snap that you see is simply because my animation is blending here. The animation actually ends as the character is returning back to default, so that little snap is it blending back to the attack. It is not an issue with the system, it is an issue with the animation and the blend. So don't worry about that. But you can see I can press it early and go back into that state. This is because I've set the always reset on entry. And the comment here is a little, like, it can help you, but it's kind of a little confusing. Whether or not the state will always reset its entry on re-entry, reset its state on re-entry, regardless of remaining weight. What this really means is, will we be able to go back into the state, regardless of what our weight is to go to another state? This is important because the way we handle our attacks is basically when our animation is complete, so light attack to idle, we just automatically rule base it. I mean, we could set up all these to just check the commands to see if they are false now, if has used command is false, and that's fine. But really, we don't even need to do that. We just need to know that when we're exiting light attack, we can re-enter this state. This is really important because the way Unreal handles state machine logic is it will go to this attack will play, and it will go back to this. If this state, light attack, so if idle to light attack transition is true, when light attack to idle transition is true, it's not going to go light attack idle. It's going to go technically light attack, look at idle, stay in light attack. That's why sometimes you might see issues where your character doesn't leave the animation, is because it literally does not transition back to idle. It starts taking this transition, sees that it can, but then looks at the transition from light attack, or from idle back to light attack, and sees that it can take that, and it will stay in the state it's in. By always reset on entry, you stop that from happening. You make it so it always replays the animation. That way it will not get stuck and just get stuck on a frame, or get stuck on returning to idle, or basically just you do buffer it, and the log will say you buffer it, the code will say you buffer it, but it doesn't actually play the animation back. That's why. So for all of our animations, really, I've only done it for these two. But for all of these guys, we want to always reset on entry, unless you don't want that to be able to happen for whatever reason, which is perfectly fine. But for all the attacks you do want them to be able to buffer the input for, you're going to want to click on the state and click always reset on entry. They're pretty easy. You just click on the state and click the box, so it's actually really easy to do. So not really a big deal, but it is very important that you do that. Otherwise, if you buffer the same input, it would not work. So if I show you, if I take away Fireball, always reset on entry, and I play the game again, then say I do this, and I buffer another one. I don't actually perform the fireball. But if I look in the output log, it says I use fireball both times. You ready? And you can watch it live. So we do fireball. Okay, cued another fireball. Fireball does not get used. And it's because of what I said. The transition from fireball to idle is ready. All we use for that transition is... Let me re-click this just so we don't forget to do it. The transition from idle to command 3 is if this command has been used. Well, since I did use the command again, this is true. However, the transition rule from fireball to idle is automatic rule-based, which means once the animation is complete, we should go to idle. Well, we have both transition rules being true. Fireball to idle and idle to fireball. Thus, it will not do the idle to fireball transition. It won't do it, just based off the way Unreal does the logic, the order it processes it. So we need to make sure, if we want to go to the same animation from the animation we just came from, that we click Always Reset on Entry. And that's how that works. And at this point, we have a buffered input system. We're essentially done with everything that we need to do. We have the short version, because I am going to add a few things here just to keep track of and keep notes of. The short version is this. We press an input that gets processed by the system. The system understands the input. It then compares the the strings of inputs that we've been giving it over a period of time. Right now, we are setting it to be 0.2 seconds. However, we should really check within a number of frames. We should say, within the last 16 frames or something, has this input sequence been input. So that's for next episode. And if that sequence has been input, then we add it to the buffer. Once it's in the buffer, we check every number of frames, and right now we're doing it on tick, but we can also check, a specified number of frames ahead and say, yes, this sequence has been entered. So what move do we want to perform now on this frame? And we can determine the move based off priority order or order in the command list. So if you want, just the last one in the list, or if you want to structure them a certain way, you can do that. Whatever one is chosen gets start command called on it. Start command gets called and triggers the action. However, since this action is now being done on tick as opposed to every time we press an input, and since we changed when we are resetting the values, basically this animation starts and then you are good to buffer another attack, another command. And so you can buffer, let's play around with it while I'm explaining it. All right, we can go into our game. We can buffer on hit stun. We can buffer on attack. So say I perform an attack. I can instantly buffer fireball right here. Or the player can hit me, right? I can get hit, and I can buffer fireball while doing that. All right. Or I can do a dash with a fireball. A dash with a fireball. Well, I screwed that one up just because I wasn't fast enough on the keyboard. But you can see I can do a forward dash buffer with a fireball. I can do regular attacks buffered together.
Fight.
I can do, right? Kind of like how we were doing combos. Really exactly how we were doing combos. But I can just buffer them naturally without even canceling into the other one and doing a combo. It just, on the next available frame, it will perform the action just because it was buffered. I can do it with crouch attacks. The attack does not matter, actually. It's just the entire system works like this now. It's just going off of seconds as opposed to frames. Okay? So after these changes, we've made it so that the values are reset when we perform the action, not when the action ends. That way, any actions we perform during the current action we're in, such as hit stun or attack or anything like that, will now be added to the end. It'll be added so that they can occur at the next available frame when possible, since it's being called every frame right now. Then in the states themselves, we've made it to where they go off, every state goes off of the commands themselves. So instead of using a Boolean to track it, it's just if the command was added and if it was executed on tick. And if it was, then we allow ourselves to re-enter the state in case we want to continue, like by pressing light attack over and over again. This does not stop combos from happening. We can still go from auto to light attack. I mean, really, I just realized I also did not change this appropriately. Technically, it would still work, but really I should take this out, and you know what I should do at this point. I should take in the idle to medium attack, what we did here, and I should copy that. And the new rule, instead of this guy, and I'll just make it ugly for now, but it should be something like this instead. Okay, very ugly, but you get the point. So no longer should we be looking for was medium attack used, but instead we want to look for if the command was used. And this will still work, I'll show you. You can tell sometimes I actually do cancel out of the move into the combo as opposed to just go to it because it was buffered. So let me show you the difference. So if I go to it because it was buffered, so say I press it, whoops. Or I can combo into it. So buffered, and now combo into it. But it does not, I just want you to know, it does not cancel anything to do with the combos. Once you perform the action, it still will allow combos to work. It'll also make combos easier, because you can just perform separate actions, have a transition between them, and check the command. Alright, and yeah, that's pretty much everything for buffered input part 1. The only difference is, the only thing we need to really cover now to make this a fully functional system is convert seconds to frames, and don't just remove the inputs once a certain amount of time has passed, but instead remove it once a certain amount of frames has passed. And that way, once a certain amount of frames have passed, we can look at our how many frames in our tick and in our manual input delay have passed to perform actions as opposed to every tick. We can use something called a circular array, which means we can remove one and perform an action at the same time. We can basically do it, you know, right one after the other. That way it's every update we're doing that, and it kind of keeps everything under control. That's not to say there aren't still things that we should adjust, like for example in the NMBP, yes, we buffer moves, but we buffer moves and hit stun just happens to take care of it afterward. Like for example, I don't even know exactly where it's at this point, but if we look at the hit stun time just on a hitbox, then after 0.5 seconds, which again will need to be converted to frames, we can then, oh, we have a buffered move, so we can use it. Really what we need to do is, instead of just buffering it instantly because our commands are reset, is be able to buffer at a certain point in the animation, or be able to buffer a certain number of frames before the animations end, different things like that. So we still need to cover all that. We're not quite done yet, but making these changes has converted it from a system that works purely off of input and changes it to one that works off the update function, our tick, and priority moves, like using fireball over light attack. So the last thing I wanted to show you before this wrapped up here, and I think it is important, you guys may know how to use breakpoints at this point. I do have an episode on it if you want to check it out, but I want to show you something. So we have this start command function, and we can see what command is being called. We can also do it in the determine command to use function. So let me show you how this works. I want to put a breakpoint here on the logic. I think this might work, but I might have accidentally changed the code, so we might have to close Visual Studio to make it work.
Ready, fight.
So if I run a command, and you can see it works. Now, look at this. The move buffer has two elements in it, like I told you it would. It has light attack and fireball, because light attack only requires the input of light attack, input type, light attack. But fireball requires backward-forward light attack, so naturally both of these moves are going to be added to the move buffer. Because that's the case, we have to determine which move to use, right? And we went over that. But now you can see it in plain text here, instead of me just explaining it to you. So we have light attack and fireball in this array. This if statement, light attack happens to be the first one that it adds. So we check the input types.num, it's 1. Move buffer I, which is 1 in this case, is fireball, which num is 3. Okay, well, it doesn't want to show you there, but you can see here, num1, num3. Since light attack has less than fireball, the move to use I don't know what change I made, but the move to use changes. So move to use light attack gets set to move buffer I, which is fireball. So after this operation, after we press F10, move to use now becomes fireball. See that? So when we call start command at the end of this, move to use.name is fireball, and that's how the priority works. So guess what the output will be? Fireball. There you go. That's how our whole buffered input system works. So guys, that's about all I got for you today. We'll pick this back up in the near future. We will finish up the input buffer system very soon, or excuse me, the buffered input system very soon. And then we will add things like charge attacks and 2-button press attacks. Currently with the system we have, we actually can press all the buttons at once. And if you do it right, like it is tough. It technically has to be on the same frame. So you want to press it all at the same time or within a very short window so that you can trigger it. It will actually work. So technically we have multi-button presses working. Like I can press literally all of them at the same time and perform fireball as opposed to light attack. So technically they work. There are a few things we're going to want to do because sometimes you don't want it to be a multi-button press. Like for example, if we're on controller and we want to do quarter circle, we do want to perform, you know, these different actions within a certain amount of time, but it's going to be a little bit different to perform a 2-button press if we have something similar. So there's a few things we will add, but we'll be going over, multi-input, multi-button commands. We'll be going over charge attacks as well. So be on the lookout for those after the buffered input episodes, and we will go from there. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, please subscribe. It does more for the channel and more for me than anything else you can do, and it just lets me know I'm doing a good job and hopefully putting out content that you enjoy. If you had any issues with this tutorial or any of my tutorials, feel free to join the Discord community. We have a really good community, and I'm very, very happy with everything we've been able to accomplish so far. I can't wait to see how far this series goes. If you want to check out any of my programming live streams, you can come hang out with me live on Fridays. I do a programming stream usually every Friday. If something comes up, might not do it that Friday, but pretty much every Friday where we're working on a side-scroller live stream. So basically we work on a side-scroller game, and I stream basically the entire contents of what we're doing, my thought process and everything. It's not scripted beforehand. It's not like these. It's completely live, so you can see everything I'm doing, the mistakes I make, and hopefully learn from it. And yep, that's all I got for you guys. So thank you so much for watching. I am Shawnthebro, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye, guys.